So we've come to the conclusion of our voyage of discovery with the secret doctrine. We've looked at some of the presuppositions that are needed for approaching this remarkable text. And I know many people are put off by it because of simply the size. It grew from 2 volumes, 2 hefty volumes of 1,500 pages. Then there was a 6-volume edition that made it even larger. But now David spoke about the thin person inside trying to escape. So now I've given you the thin person inside the secret doctrine that has escaped, not tried to escape, that has finally escaped. And it really is truly one of the most remarkable texts of modern esotericism. Any of you who have any interest in esotericism, philosophy, modern religions, you name it, you really should be familiar with this book, especially this edition. I know the annotator very well, and I can recommend it. Mainly because it is truly one of the first great modern classics. If you look at the history of Western esotericism, till the publication of the Secret Doctrine in 1888, everything else was out of the European tradition. If you lived in the English-speaking world, everything was a translation. It was a translation from some European language into English, from some ancient language into English. So we are always having this filter of the translator who is interpreting. And even with the Bible, as you know, there is still disagreements about what is the exact text. New translations keep coming. But now, with the Secret Doctrine, you have the reverse. You have something in English now being translated into other languages. As you know, it's been translated into every European language. And Thomas, I believe there was a Hungarian translation.
Only one part.
Only one part, yes. Well, one part is better than none, right?
1/3 of the first volume.
Okay. Well, something for you to do in your old age.
In manuscript level, we have it.
Yes, yes.
2/3 of the whole volume.
But it's remarkable to think that a 19th century work is still being read and discussed all over the world. You know, it really is quite remarkable when you think of all the great figures of the 19th century that were around when Blavatsky was alive, perhaps other than Darwin, and of course you know people of English literature, there's Dickens that's still being read, Jane Austen has got a revival, but of course mainly because she's a woman. You know, people are now looking for other areas and marginalized groups. But it really is quite remarkable that this wonderful book is still being discussed. And when we meditated on the stanzas, that also gives you a different idea of how to approach the text. Most of the approaches from the publication of the book till the 1970s was all about study and discussing, as I pointed out, the mechanics of it, the machinery of it, the parts that made it up, instead of really grasping the whole. What's the idea that she wants to take you? You know, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the main Buddhist texts in Mahayana Buddhism. It was from Sanskrit, it was translated into Chinese, it's influential in Korea, Japan. And in this text, the Buddha is addressing a gathering of bodhisattvas, somewhat like this. And he gives a parable, he gives a story about a very wealthy man who had a beautiful house. And he came home, and the building was on fire, and his children were inside. But his children were so young, he thought, if I say, children, children, there's a fire, either they would not even know what the word fire meant, or they would have gotten afraid and run deeper into the blazing building. So he said, children, I brought you ponies and a wonderful cart and all sorts of toys, and of course they come out. And the Buddha gives the example that the burning building is our world. The Buddha is the benevolent father, and we are the children in the burning building. And so to get us out, to hook us, so to speak, there are all of these myths and stories and religions which first draw us out of our condition, which is disastrous for us, and then turn us to the spiritual life. We also looked at the preconditions needed to approach it, which is really a focus or an interest. There has to be something to draw you to it. Though I must say, this has made it much easier by focusing mainly on the stanzas themselves, a little bit of commentary, and then the second half of the book. So imagine, this is the first 2 volumes of the Secret Doctrine. The second part is the part that is usually neglected, which are all the chapters on myth and symbol. And HPB starts out this section, the very first words are, the study of the hidden meaning in every religious and profane legend of whatever nation, large or small, preeminently the traditions of the East, has occupied the greater portion of the present writer's life. So she is telling us something, and so she uses this term, the mystery language of the initiates. That when we read this text as we would read another text without understanding that there are levels of meaning, that something allegorical interpretation, symbolical interpretation, we may lose it. And actually the symbolic parts that I've included here, I think, represent the best of her writing. In her entire corpus of writing, these symbological chapters as a whole represents her best writing. The stanzas, of course, are from some ancient tradition that we don't know of, but those chapters on symbolism, as she says, is really her. We can say, well, the masters dictated it, or give some other interpretation, but this is HPB. This is H.P. Blavatsky. And so we get an idea of her interest and how she worked. I think with all of her writings, Madame Blavatsky really, really, really needed a good editor. She had editors who really didn't quite grasp her. The original Secret Doctrine was edited by an uncle and a nephew whom themselves were not editors, but certainly interested in the material. But it does tend to be digressive. Nobody denies that. But even in that digression, even in approaching those vast works, it is a form of yoga. It trains the mind to focus. You have a paragraph where she starts with something, leads to something else, goes to something else, and you really have to concentrate to follow what she is trying to say. So even the reading of the Secret Doctrine can be regarded as a form of yoga. And of course the problem that many people have is that, well, I don't understand it. Well, you're not supposed to. You're not a Mahatma. You know, truly, you're not an adept. So you're not supposed to understand it. But what it may do is perhaps jog the memory. For a minute, tear aside that veil and give you that little insight. And all you need is just that little glimmer to understand that. Because if you can understand her writings, believe me, you can understand anything else, right? So this ability to focus and the recognition of there is something special, I think is so great. Unfortunately, we had ordered copies, but they hadn't arrived. But I think those of you who are interested, you can certainly get them through Ingrid if you want to. Or, of course, it's available on that great source of all things, Amazon, at a great reduction. So if you approach this book, there are many, many, many commentaries. I did a presentation in New York recently about all the books that have been written about this book. And it really is a shelf, literally this big. And some of the commentaries are larger than the book itself. But you really have to approach it directly. You know, one of the great changes in modern culture, in the past we were quite happy for people to tell us about things. One of the great changes with the youth of today is they want direct experience. This is why religions are failing. In the past, the priest was the buffer in between your experience. He told you about it. But youth of today really want the experience themselves. They don't want that filter, right? They want just to experience it. But if you do read it, sooner or later, you will come across something called the Bowen Notes. This is actually the original publishing was first published in London as a pamphlet. It was initially published in 1932 in a small magazine, Theosophy in Ireland. And you will come across this published in 1960 as a pamphlet. In fact, it's so far ago that they still refer to the 6-volume edition of The Secret Doctrine. £4.16. Could you imagine, for 6 volumes? But they claim to be notes taken by a Commander Bowen who went to discussions with HBB on The Secret Doctrine and recorded them April 19th, 1891, literally 2 or 3 weeks before she died. And they're very useful, but the main thing that comes out of these notes is that if one of the comments, he's telling you what HBB has said. One of the things is, if you read The Secret Doctrine like any other book, you're sure to get confused. And really, what you have to do is grasp the 3 fundamental propositions in the book. Probably the only thing I haven't talked to you about. But some of us have been skeptical. I am like truly the doubting Thomas of theosophy. As you know, the headquarters of the Theosophical Society is in Madras, which is also the shrine of St. Thomas. Perhaps not Thomas the doubting apostle, Thomas Didymus, who is somewhat different. But one of the things that I wanted to find out is that, okay, Commander Bowen wrote all of these things. When was he a member? And we have no record of his membership. I've checked at our international headquarters. I've checked in London with the records. So there is no record of this person being a member. And in the 19th century, theosophical meetings were not just open to the public. They really were open only to members because really in its infancy, the theosophical movement or the society was really regarded as a radical thing. People were ostracized, you know. People came to break up meetings because religion was still so strong. So you had to be a member to even attend. So how could he have attended if there's no record of his membership? So that's a puzzle. And then if you read these Bowen notes, the things that always struck me is how modern the language is. This is not 19th century writing. And then she uses then a word that really doesn't appear in HB. She calls someone dumbskulls. Well, she doesn't really use that term. It's the only place I've come across this term. She uses flapdoodle, which means it's like nonsense. So there are all of these questions on it. It's interesting that when it first came out, it was published, and that was it. People didn't go to it. Ironically, of course, it was published when pretty well everybody who knew Madame Blavatsky had died, who could say something different, which is the interesting thing. So they were certainly great students of the secret doctrine then, but none of them, as they would say in America, jumped on it. They didn't really embrace it or quote it. It's only till 1960, till the TS in England then published it, and I notice it has HS as the person's note, which probably could be Hugh Sherman, I would believe. Then this became the godsend of the Theosophical Society for studying the secret doctrine, because you didn't have to read through the book. You just read the 3 fundamental propositions in the beginning, and perhaps went to the index and looked at some terms. So this really helped the secret doctrine to become tremendously popular, but not the whole book, but as I say, those 3 damn fundamentals, right? It has now become such a main thing that even the United Lodge of Theosophists, which are the purest of all purists, even include it when you buy their secret doctrine. It is an insert with it, right? Though when I was in Los Angeles earlier on this year, I was talking to someone there and they showed me some correspondence from the time where the editors of Theosophy magazine had written to Robert Bowen asking about if there were any further notes. Nobody's ever seen these notes. Written about, well, tell us about your father, are there anything further? And of course, he was very evasive. His father has gone on to somewhere else. This is the same Bowen who published a book called The Sayings of the Ancient One or something like that, about a white tribe he met in Africa who gave him these secret teachings that are very much like Light on the Path, for instance. So I'm not saying they're a good approach, but they are simply an approach. It's another commentary. And Barry Thompson, who is the librarian at the headquarters, actually gave a talk on these Bowen notes. And he goes through the different parts on it, finding out there are some certain discrepancies, and he ends with this. I have claimed, this is his words, I have claimed that the notes are questionable because there seem to be problems of consistency between the notes and HPB. But others might reply that HPB would never have won the Nobel Prize for consistency. I agree, but she is not totally incoherent, which is why we study her today. And if we are to believe Bowen, she spent the best part of 10 years writing a very detailed book in order for us to ignore the detail. She deserves a little more respect than that, right? So while I think those notes, and as I say, anyone who approaches the book will eventually come across them, even in the way people teach the secret doctrine in some groups. But again, there's nothing better than seeing for yourself, judging for yourself. And believe me, it's not a difficult book. It's really a wonderful, it's an organic book. If I were to use one word to describe it, it would be organic. It really is some living, wonderful, exotic plant whose perfume overpowers you, perhaps. You know, you may not quite understand it, but you are certainly attracted to it. And the older way was this study, the old brain-mind approach, but we are now moving toward a more intuitional approach. So I would say simply read it, and this has cut down the entire book to just over 200 pages from 1,500, right? And it also has what none of the other commentaries, there is the edition published by the Theosophical Publishing House by Boris de Zirkov that has, I think, a 70-page introduction. And it's all about the history and what happened and how it was written. But it will tell you nothing about what is contained in this book. No overview. So I tried to give some introduction. What was the contents? What does it really contain? And the other great thing, if I may say, is that the index also functions as a glossary. because you come across all of these terms that are used in different ways throughout the book. So imagine you're asked to buy one book and then buy another book to understand the one book. So I've given you an index that functions as a glossary, giving you the derivations of it and the meanings, but according to HPB. She uses a lot of Sanskrit words, she uses a lot of remarkable terms, but the meanings were drawn from her writings. And then we're just going to go into the summing up into the book, and then we'll have any questions if you'd like. So this is, she says, let us recapitulate, since some of you may not have read this book, or certainly not got that far, because you'll be with the three fundamental propositions. Let us recapitulate and show, by the vastness of the subjects expounded, how difficult, if not impossible, it is to do them full justice. The secret doctrine, and she's just not meaning this book, the ancient wisdom, the esoteric tradition. The secret doctrine is the accumulated wisdom of the ages, and its cosmogony alone is one of the most stupendous and elaborate systems. It is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers whose respective experiences were made to test and verify the traditions passed orally by one early race to another, of the teachings of higher and exalted beings who watched over the childhood of humanity. In fact, she starts out the book by saying, these teachings are not any inventions of hers. So here is this tradition that stretches back, and no one will deny today that there is this sort of tradition, that their ancient peoples had ways of looking at the world. 2, the fundamental law in the system, the central point from which all emerged, around and toward which all gravitates, and upon which is hung the philosophy of the rest, is the one homogeneous divine substance principle, the one radical cause. It is called substance principle, for it becomes substance on the plane of the manifested universe, an illusion, while it remains a principle in the beginningless and endless abstract, visible and invisible space. It is the omnipresent reality, impersonal because it contains all and everything. Its impersonality is the fundamental conception of the system. It is latent in every atom of the universe and is the universe itself. So this living world we're in is this part of this principle, and of course we are not separate from the universe. We are part and parcel of this living, vibrant thing. 3, the universe is the periodical manifestation of this unknown absolute essence. It is best described as neither spirit nor matter, but both. 4, the universe is called, with everything in it, Maya, because all is temporary therein, from the ethereal life of a firefly to that of the sun. This is her definition of Maya. Most people think Maya means something that doesn't exist. But Maya, in its very temporary nature, this is what she means, that we don't perceive it. Imagine, for instance, you know that till really modern times, people could not see ultraviolet. You know this color ultraviolet light, because there was no mechanism to display it, but it was still there. There are other parts of the spectrum that we don't see. There are parts of the color spectrum that animals see that we don't see. Have you ever seen the pictures of how insects see plants? It's totally different than how we see them. They actually see them as vibration, a totally different color scheme. So this whole universe is around us, and we are seeing one spectrum. And of course, as our faculties develop, we will see more and more. Yet the universe is real enough to the conscious beings in it, which are as unreal as it itself. 5. Everything in the universe throughout all its kingdoms is conscious, endowed with a consciousness of its own kind and on its own plane of perception. We must remember that because we do not perceive any signs which we can recognize of consciousness, say in stones, we have no right to say that no consciousness exists there. There is no such thing as either dead or blind matter, as there is no blind or unconscious law. And finally, 6, the universe is worked and guided from within outwards. This is the great principle. We talk about as above, so below, but it is really from within outwards, meaning not from on one level to another level, right? As above, so it is below, as in heaven, so on earth. And man, the microcosm and miniature copy of the macrocosm, the great whole, is the living witness to this universal law. Imagine, so humanity, each of us, is a living witness, a testament to this principle and to its mode of action. We see that every external motion, act, gesture, whether voluntary or mechanical, organic or mental, is produced and preceded by internal feeling or emotion, will or volition, thought or mind. The whole cosmos is guided, controlled, and animated by an almost endless series of hierarchies of sentient beings, each having its mission to perform, and who, whether we give to them one name or another, call them Dhyani Chohans or angels, are messengers in the sense that they are the agents of karmic and cosmic laws. And of course, she comments that the whole order of nature evinces a progressive march toward a higher life. There is a design in the action of seemingly blindest forces. So this idea of progression, this ordered universe, this wonderful, living, vibrant reality, if we could make that flip from modern culture, which is still in this scientific way of seeing dead matter from the 19th century, if we could see this whole universe as a living, vibrant thing, and we in turn are not separate from it, but part and parcel, we would then find our place in this hierarchy of being, as David Rolfe showed us in one of the illustrations, the great chain of being, right? We are part and parcel of this. And until we find our place, our work, we are really just struggling blindly. In the voice of the silence she refers to, behold the host of souls that are like just driftwood on the ocean of life, right? By knowing the system, you know your place within the system, right? Which then gives you that key. So I would like to close on that matter. I've already praised the Euro School to endless degrees, so I won't do that. I don't think I'm letting any cats out of the bags, as they say, by letting you know that there will be no Euro School next year. I know you're all crushed, I can tell. But there will be in 2011, not for any particular reason, but there will be so many other things happening next year, so this will give you now a chance to save up your euros and florins and whatever else you have. So now let us discuss, let us talk about these issues. Any questions? Yes, Colin.
Can I ask you to clarify what you said at the start about those chapters at the end of your book? Are they chapters you've taken out of the SD sequence because of their particular character, or exactly what are they?
You will find with all of my work, and I've been editing HPB for a quarter century, you will find that I am the most fundamentalist of fundamentalists. I think the only person I know who is even more fundamentalist than me is Tony Maddock, who is the head of the Mahatma Letters Trust, who will not even use the Theosophy Company edition of The Secret Doctrine, because in the old days they would have what was called folio numbers, which would tell the printer how to bind it. They removed those, and so it's not a facsimile. He has literally counted lines and words, so everything has a meaning. The book is this gigantic code. So every word there are so many words and they add up to this. So he takes the biscuit, as they would say in England. So everything in here is HPB. And I didn't really have to rearrange everything, just like in my abridgment of Isis from a decade ago. I really found that you just have to be able to follow her somehow. And these books really do themselves. I did Isis Unveiled, ironically, in the same building where she wrote it. I was actually living in the building that she wrote Isis Unveiled, and I never sat down to abridge it. I had it, and I was there, and of course, the rooms have been cut up into very small rooms. There are no televisions and things like that. And I thought, well, reading it through, well, this could go, and this could go, and it did itself in 3 months. It was a delight to do it. So to answer your question, no, everything is in the order. There have been 3 previous abridgments of this book. One in 1907 by Catherine Hillard, one in 1930, I believe, published in Peking, and of course the Humphreys Preston edition. But all of them were shriveled versions of The Secret Doctrine. They were very literal. They tried to make it the way they were, but they were just like a raisin compared to a grape. They were just, and so the way the book is done, by the way, the original, is actually Volume 1 came out first, and Volume 2 followed it actually some months later. They weren't published together. So if you notice, Volume 1 has the summing up, while Volume 2 doesn't. So there was this sort of delay. So I guess they figured people who would get sent the first volume needed some understanding. But I found, as you know, the way we study the Secret Doctrine today, we automatically go from the stanzas and even to the stanzas in Volume 2. This chapters on science, which also make the final third of each volume, didn't really hold up to abridgment, mainly because they were dealing with anticipating the criticisms of 19th century science. So those really didn't hold, and I didn't want to have chapters that were just a paragraph. But you find they really, really, really work as chapters. Some of them are difficult, and now, since I noticed reading the program today of what I was supposed to be presenting, I thought, since I'm concluding, let me see what I'm supposed to be doing. It's called The Secret of the Secret Doctrine. And the real secret, after doing it, actually this book has some revelations to me, which I won't go into because they're really things, not mystical or remarkable things, but life does have this irony. We think of the unmanifest, the one life as this abstract principle, but truly, the Hindus define the absolute as Sat, Chit, Ananda, right? Sat, Chit, and Ananda, bliss. It really is this bliss. I remember years ago seeing an article by the international president of the Theosophical Society called The Yoga of Delight, and I was so shocked that she would use this word, delight. The universe does have a very playful side. As perfect example, right there, we came into this room every day, and we had eyes, but yet we could not see, yet out of the mouths of babes, so to speak. It was right there in front of us, but now how did this happen? David dealt a lot with Prometheus. Synchronicity is such a bland word. What does it mean? Yes, there's a combination. But there really is a delight with it all. And after doing this book, I realized that, of course, the stanza part 1 and part 2, are in Roman numerals. And then part 3 is in Arabic, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I found that they correspond to it. So the easiest way to do it is you read chapter 1, stanza 1 in the Roman numeral, and you follow it really with the symbolism part, and they match up. They really are giving you further information on each part, which I thought was quite remarkable. The exception being the very, very last chapter 17, which is a combination of 2 chapters, so it should be split apart. So I thought how remarkable that they really do work together. So you have the stanzas, as I point out, as you can see, they're all very, very short. There's the stanza, and just enough commentary to give you a little background. But then if you want further, the third part really gives you, for each particular chapter of the stanzas, some particular insight or background. I hope that answers your question. There are also great things about the moon, serpents, snakes. Enoch, who is very, very popular in America right now. Everybody is crazy about Enoch. There are even new channel works, the Keys of Enoch, and of course the fallen angel. There are really some nice, the lotus as a universal symbol, the mundane egg, not the ones we have for breakfast, but the larger world egg. Yes?
Mike, I was very intrigued what you had to say about the Bowen notes. I mean, are we saying that if this man was never a member of the society, and your investigation suggests that he wasn't, are we saying that this is a pseudonym or not a real person or a composite, or did the information come from somewhere else? I mean, what are your own thoughts about where this material came from?
Actually, you'll find I have very little thoughts about anything. Really, it's true. I don't think about a lot of things. But Bowen, the person, the son of this person, could perhaps have felt that by giving this authority, or it could have been based on his conversations with earlier people, and perhaps this was the literal way. Look at the stanzas themselves, you know. Are they some ancient revealed text going back to the dawn of humanity? Did HPB create them herself? But as I point out in the introduction, regardless of whether they are or aren't, they really said, I'll read you what this Michael Gomes said. Whether they sprang from the depths of Madame Blavatsky's consciousness or are the meditations of ancient seers, the stanzas of Jian have had an enduring impact on subsequent esoteric groups. This cannot be denied. The cosmology, before her, in Hermeticism, occultism, everything else, the gigantic overreaching philosophy, the cosmology really wasn't there. This whole putting together and tying it up. So if Madame Blavatsky, for instance, was the author of this, and as she points out, and wrote the Mahatma letters, she truly is beyond all of these. She is the seer she is talking about, right? Yes, David reminds me she is every woman. And man thrown into boot. So whether he felt this necessary as a means to get his message through, we don't know. I don't know. Certainly, it's a nice little overview, but it's not the entire book. You know, it's as much as my nail is not my entire body. You know, it's a nice way of approaching it, but unfortunately what has happened, people end with this approach. They read this and they read the 3 fundamental propositions, and that's really the book, and then look in the index. That seems to be the way of studying for a lot of people, which is too bad. Because in reading this book and coming across all of those things that just don't make any sense, as I say, esoteric texts function on a different way. By simply going through it, it will have the effect. When you plant a seed, the plant doesn't just simply appear the next day. It's a very slow developing process. And of course, as W.Q. Judge, who was one of her co-workers, said, we have to start learning to think in terms of centuries for the effects. You weren't all drawn into this today. This is another link you have picked up from the ancient past. Nobody comes to this just by chance or I'm interested in it. Think how many other groups that are out there that could capture your attention, right? And to come to this particular thing, of all things that unites us, that is quite remarkable. So nobody comes upon it just today, you know. This you are just connecting a link again, and one step leading to the other and the other, you know. In another life, you'll connect with it. Harold.
I do feel in the particular case of Bowen, father and son, it doesn't give a hoot. It shouldn't give a hoot as to where they come from or who they were or anything else, because the books themselves or what Bowen had to say are very interesting, fascinating, and even exciting to what he had to say. And so then it's read the book and never bother about where they come from.
Good. Yes. Good.
I was a bit shocked by that paper by Barry, so I called Jeffrey on the telephone, Jeffrey Farthing, and told him about this. And I wanted to have his opinion. And he said, I don't care where it came from, it's a very valuable text. So and to me, after 40 years, P.G. Bowen's The Occult Way and everything else by him is remarkable, valuable, and not to be compared with anything else.
Yes.
And I think the remarkable thing, everyone who has read his books say they are, what he put himself was remarkable. So if this is an extension of him, if this, like the Buddha story, where this is his means to draw you into the text, say HPB said, if Bowen himself, before he wrote all these books, said, I'm saying this is the result of my studies, so what? People will, but perhaps this is his way of getting you to understand it. The test and validity of all of this is, does it work? Does it have an effect?
Exactly.
Regardless of great names, of what tag you put on it. Are we just reading the secret doctrine because of the Mahatmas? Are we reading it because some legend gives it this way? Or are we reading it because it does work? The Bowen notes are valuable. They do have some insight. Just like the diagram of meditation does work, but whether it is from HPB or not, those things are irrelevant. If you are trying to cross a lake, you don't argue who made the boat, right? So, yes, any other?
Yes,
Yes,
if no one else wants to speak.
Yes.
When I read The Secret Doctrine, I felt a sort of magic in it. But when I went to read ISIS afterwards, there was none. Is that your experience?
Actually, ISIS was my first book. I got it as, I had my parents give it to me as a Christmas present when I was like 16 or something. I thought it was going to be something racy, ISIS Unveiled. I was sorely disappointed, the first of many in my life, no less. I was sorely disappointed, I must say. It too, as they say, turned out to be a horse of a different color. But ISIS, ironically enough, is more read by academics than The Secret Doctrine. ISIS they know and love. Secret Doctrine, it's a closed book to them. It has the reverse effect because ISIS is the great repository of all of this 19th century. ISIS represents the end of a certain approach, the antiquarian approach that gathered all this omni-gatherum, and you find literally people who still haven't been translated into English. Eliphas Levi's, the first translations appear in ISIS. So of course, if you know all the people and all the little asides that are in ISIS, of course, it's going to be interesting. If you don't, then of course it's something else. They both have their merit. I would say that in writing The Secret Doctrine, she presupposes that you've read ISIS, because it is this gigantic, of course, as she herself says, one of her last published article, which was called My Books, if you ever have a chance to read it, it really is very insightful. She wrote it 2 weeks before she died in response to criticisms about ISIS. And she herself well said, it reads as if she took a whole bunch of papers and just threw them all together and then picked them up. She keeps going and going and going and going, but as I say, I don't think her books are meant to work in the normal way, where we want everything, you know, very concise, and especially today, thanks of course to MTV. How do movies start? If you read Jane Austen, for instance, compared to a novel now, it's like looking like a camera coming into focus, so you see the distance, and she'll describe the house or Mansfield Park, and you know, start putting in the things. Today it starts with an explosion, right? Or someone gets killed. So immediately to hook us, because we have become so jaded, not only in our palates because we have so much more, but because of the intense variety. Our senses are just bombarded. As someone pointed out to me when I was in Los Angeles, the internet is become the astral light. We talk about the Akashic records and all of these things out there. Well, technically the internet is that you can pull up everything through, and where does the things on the internet exist?